Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a moment that I've been thinking about for a long time, and I think the one emotion that I can really use to enunciate it is almost a sense of immediate acting nostalgia. And nostalgia being an emotion which is both sad and happy. I am sad because I've had so many moments to be happy. And I'm happy because I have such a great opportunity to be sad. And it's a really hard emotion to explain and not sound like a crazy person. But that's kind of the emotion that I'm left to feel right now. You know, I am sad because right now I look at so many happy and wonderful memories over the last couple of years and realize that those are in the past. The things and all of the wonderful moments I've had in this organization to me are done. That was my time. But on the other hand, I just have to be happy that I had the opportunity to have those moments. And I also have to be happy that this is an organization which is built on the leaders who take charge, handing over the power and the keys to this organization to the next generation. We are a youth organization, and the only reason that I got to have these opportunities is because I was given the chance to take the reins of the executive, to make mistakes, and to try to feel my own way. And so I am happy that I get to participate in this tradition and allow someone else to try the exact same thing that I just went through. Since I realize that this is probably the last time that I will speak in the Manitoba legislature, I decided I wanted to take a little bit of an opportunity to soapbox and a little bit of time to be a little bit self-referential. I am a strange person in this environment because I'm an engineer. I come from a science background. And I want to talk a little bit about the idea of science and politics. It's a topic that tends to get STEM folks very excited. And I want to talk about some of the merits of why I think there is value in looking at a scientific perspective when we approach politics, but also some of the blind spots that I think scientists have when they try and approach politics. So what do we have? So for myself personally, I think one of the most influential thinkers for me when I was a teenager and I entered into this organization probably would have been Carl Sagan, which I can't think of a nerdier person to be into. Carl Sagan was a science educator and communicator. And I loved his joy for life and his vision for a world in which scientific technology could be used as a force for immense good, to bring up the standards of living for people, to deal with the harsh inequalities of the world, and to make the relative comfortableness that we live in our society available to more and more people. He was a harsh critic of the use of science to drive military technology and believed that wherever we tried to develop science for the purposes of destruction, we had to question what our ultimate intentions were going to be with it. And one thing that he borrowed a lot from science fiction writers was the idea of this potentially futuristic, utopic society where we used all of the energy that came from the sun to our planet, and we were able to distribute that energy freely to support people around the world. Some people refer to this as a type 1 society. And the interesting thing is whether or not the society is actually practically possible, is that we're not there yet. But we live at this very perilous point where the quality of our technology is increasing very quickly, where our capabilities are suddenly way beyond what our frame of reference set for has been in the past. The actions of humanity now can change the world in a way that was not true for the last 10,000 years of human history. And I worry sometimes that our frame of reference for how we understand what our politics has to be in the 21st century is ill-equipped. Because this situation in which we live in the Anthropocene, in which the humanity projects its power not just on other humans, but on the entire planet, has really only been the case since the end of the Second World War. That is not a long period of time to change our reference point for politics. And I want to examine a couple of the issues that make this important. One of the most obvious ones is climate change. The scary thing about climate change is that the warming that is projected up until 2050 will happen no matter whatever actions we take. This was something that was chosen by the generations that came before us, and actions that we have to choose how we want to handle as future leaders now. We determine what we do now, what warming and climate change will be like until 2100. That is our responsibility. It also means that we have to listen. It is unacceptable that there are people in our government who still wonder whether or not climate change is happening when I had to evacuate people from their homes in British Columbia. It is unacceptable that there are people in our government who don't believe in climate change when Ottawa is flooding and when countries are going to disappear into the sea. We have to expect more from our leaders to understand these issues and to make the appropriate judgment calls. We also have to understand that science gives us this ability to be optimistic even about our deepest problems. That while climate change is definitely a scary thing, and it's going to be costly to fix and deal with, it gives us the opportunity to pursue technology and energy sources that might make it cheaper for us to provide energy, that might make it easier for us to decentralize and provide power to communities that have not had enough of it up until now. We can talk about another issue. I think antibiotic resistance doesn't get enough attention in the press today. Chemical antibiotics were probably the most powerful class of drug developed in the 20th century, with the power to eradicate most forms of communicable disease. That was an amazing invention. But today, we are running into strains of bacteria that are resistant to almost all forms of chemical antibiotics. And that's scary. But again, we have the opportunity to come up with new ways to fight disease and possibly change the way that humans interact with the microbial world in the 21st century. There are a couple of themes I want to highlight from these two examples. One is that in the 20th century, humanity stumbled upon some amazing inventions and pieces of technology. Fossil fuels were an amazing source of energy that changed the way that the majority of humans live their lives. Antibiotics were an amazing class of drugs that prevented millions and millions of deaths, and we should be grateful for them. However, we have to understand that in the 21st century, being invested solely in one type of technology or one type of solution is a folly. That anything we choose to do with the power that humanity has on this planet will inevitably come with negative externalities that we might not foresee right now. And that the challenge of our technological development into the future will be that of trying to find multifaceted approaches. Trying to find approaches that tackle our problems from multiple different perspectives. And the other thing that we should pull out of these narratives is that for most of human history, we could understand the major threat to our group, whether that be a tribe, a nation, a city-state, or whatever it's been throughout history, as being another group, some sort of enemy. In the history of Canada, we could understand that as the USSR or Nazi Germany, some great existential threat to our nation. But in the 21st century, the existential threat to our nation is the climate and bacteria. Those aren't issues that we can solve by vanquishing some foreign enemy, and those are problems that we have to solve with foreign powers, that we cannot do alone. And so that is ultimately one of the great questions of the 21st century. Are we going to come to a sort of global understanding that allows us to work together? Are we going to work for peace and the stable order that allows us to solve these problems so that we can develop into what could be a more utopic and a more equal world in the future and in the centuries to come? And when politicians don't look away from science and look away from what is being done and look away from the important lessons that we can draw from these questions, I think we are definitely steering ourselves into a very dangerous place. But on the other hand, I do want to criticize something that often happens among scientists and engineers. Scientists and engineers heavily rely on a stable social order. We take, for example, my longtime partner, Katie McDonald. She's working on an amazing project. She's working on artificial immune systems, changing the human immune system so that we can fight autoimmune disorder, so that we can make organ transplants much safer and more effective, and so that we can treat certain types of blood cancer. The technology that Katie and her lab develop will potentially revolutionize the world of medicine, and we should be so grateful for that. But the difficulty of this is that that project requires a lot of time and energy, and that one amazingly intelligent woman with all the resources needs a lot of resources to be able to develop that technology. And so what that requires ultimately is a larger, stable social order. And I think that a lot of scientists don't really want to acknowledge that we require this stable social order in order to drive our society forward. And I think that takes the form of a lot of scientists and engineers never wanting to engage with social questions. And the danger of doing that is that indifference often implies that we are okay with how things are now. And it is easy to say, look at all the good things we could be doing with this technology. Why don't we just let all these other issues wait while we solve the problems? And I don't think that is the right way to look at the advancement of science. I believe it was MLK who said that peace is not the absence of violence. Peace is the presence of justice. And we have to look to our parliamentary leaders and to our leaders across all communities to make sure that we have a release valve that allows for justice so that we have a peaceful and stable social order. I've heard a lot of stories in this House of incredible inequality that still exists in our country today. I heard current MLAs talking about how they started by protesting police violence and brutality against their communities. And we have to ask that if there are communities in our country who can't find neutral arbiters in the law, who are afraid of the officials who are supposed to enforce the law, what is it that we are saying? If we choose to be indifferent, what we are saying is that that community and that those groups should stay down. And that's not acceptable. What we have to say is that we should expect better, and that we have to find the appropriate venues to release justice and to dispense neutral arbitration. You know, I've heard from people in this House about how they've dealt with suicides in their community. The lack of clean water, the lack of adequate health care in their communities, often in reserves and in northern Canada. And we have to ask, if someone can't provide clean water and safe food and a good education for their children, what investment will they have in our social order? What do they care about the advancement of their technology? What do they care about us who are living well in the city when we care so little for them? And so it's important for us as scientists and engineers to always be thinking about what we are saying if we choose to be indifferent. That walking away from the difficult social questions isn't a form of impartiality. It's a judgment that the way that things are right now is okay and acceptable. And that is an opinion, and that is a stance to be taken. So these are some large issues. I want to bring it back to everyone who's in this House right now. And the thing is that when it comes to large issues like that, no single person in this room can do anything about it. But that isn't to say that I absolve you from taking responsibility, that we are free to say that there is nothing that we can do. What it means is that we have to learn how to organize. I think that politics and social change grows up from local behaviors, grows up from people who are willing to engage with their community and make it better. And I think that one of the things that Youth Parliament of Manitoba can do, especially as I come to at the end of my time here, is be an amazing place to learn how to lead, to learn how to run an organization, and that the skills that we practice here, where there is a lot of room for error, for mistakes, where in an 8-year career, I spent several years being mentored, I spent several years actually running this organization. I spent several years trying to mentor others doing this, is that I was able to take away a lot about how to run an organization, how to look after people, how to manage social change, how to change things in the communities that I participate in. And so my challenge for people who go on through this organization is to take the time to learn how to do these things. These nitty-gritty questions of logistics, of finance, of reaching out, of developing people and talent in your community are the things that allow you to make political change. That learning how to do these small tasks in an organization like this will prepare you so that you are able to take on those tasks in your community and to be fully active and engaged democratic citizen when the time comes for you to stand up for your issue and your community. And the last thing I want to say is that it is so important that youth take this on, that we give ourselves a voice and the ability to try this in an environment that is friendly to us and that isn't here to judge us for what we choose to do. And I think that the last part of my speech goes to those who are going to take on the mantle of the executive into the future, because I think it is a really touching moment to have to try to develop as a mentor, to have to really try to reach and establish a position in a community. That is such a difficult thing to do. It demands a lot. And I think that having that demand to look after people in this community has made me a better leader, has made me more generous, and has taught me a lot. And so my hope for each of the executive is that you have fun, you have a good time, you build a community, you take an organization which has been gifted to you with 96 years of history, and you make it better than it was when you received it, and when your time is done, you pass it on to the next person in line. Thank you, Madam Speaker.